As a facilitator, I'm always looking for opportunities to learn from other facilitators. Today, I'm so excited to bring to you a conversation that I had with Safia, who is a brilliant facilitator with over 20 years of experience. I've had the pleasure of learning from her in live co-facilitation and also in the hours of conversations that we've had behind the scenes. I really wanted to ask her some questions on camera and share her insights with you on this YouTube channel. Our conversation was over an hour and a half long, so what I've decided to do is chop it up and create a mini series out of it. In this video, we're diving straight into one of the toughest aspects of facilitation, at least in my opinion, managing time and sticking to your schedule whilst also being totally responsive to what's coming up in the group. So I hope that you'll like this interview, and also watch out for other videos that I will have coming out with Safia, where I ask her about her journey into facilitation, the challenges that she currently faces, how she handles participant pushback, and we also discuss some of the more tokenistic aspects of DEI initiatives and how she's trying to navigate those. So without further ado, I will let Safia introduce herself, and then I will basically drop you into the interview.
Okay, what should I say? Hi, my name is Safia. I have a company called Kusoma that focuses on anti-oppression education. We essentially work across sectors, but quite a lot of the work that I do is in the voluntary and charity sector in the UK. So I have worked in both youth work settings and mostly in and around homelessness. A lot of the work that I do is underpinned by systems thinking and what it is to embrace complexity and take a holistic, systems-wide approach to change initiatives in organisations that are really genuinely wanting to do the work of furthering equity and ensuring environments are indeed inclusive, where people show up and feel as though they belong.
So let's say you're in a session and there's someone or a couple people who bring out things that are like kind of out of left field, or you make like a quick inventory and you're like, there's just not going to be time, and this is not going to be a useful use of the session together. How do you respond to that? Like, is there a sorting process that you have in your head for thinking, that's not super relevant, but I can still tie that in, versus like, that's definitely not relevant and I'm going to park that?
Yeah, I think it's hard. Like, I think that more than anything, you want people in that space to feel heard, but also you want them to feel that their contributions are really valued as well. So It's hard sometimes because I want to park quite a lot of what people say, but I want to do it in a way that isn't then going to put up a barrier to them contributing, the next time they have a thought or a reflection. And so I'll be quite transparent. So I think that with kind of sensitivity and diplomacy and tact, you can say quite a lot. So I can, thank somebody for their contribution and say, that sounds like a really important thing that we're wanting to discuss. I'm just going to check with my session and see if it's something we can tie in. If not, then maybe that's something that we can feed back to whoever it is that's arranged the session. Sounds like it'd be really good for another session. It sounds like a really good thing to take into reflective practice. There are a few things that I am consistently recommending to clients. Structured reflective practice is one of those things, because of that reason, because there's, I go into a session and one of the things that I promise is that there'll be unfinished business today. There's no way that we can cover everything that everybody feels is important. That doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that in order to get through the day, we have to put some boundaries around our conversation, what we're going to do, what we're going to explore, because that will mean that we get the most out of it. It'll make for the most meaningful time together. And it'll mean that we can't cover everything, but we can hopefully cover some stuff really well, and we can kind of get deep, if you like, with some areas. So I'll always validate, I'll always repeat back, because I think that reflection and summary are really good tools that can work in terms of clarification. So I might say, that's really interesting. What I'm hearing is, and then reflect that back. That gives the participant an opportunity to say, no, you've got it wrong. What I actually meant was, and that might be more relevant. Or then I've had it clarified to me that I was on the right track. I have understood that it's outside the boundaries of this conversation. And you can do other things. I can recommend a podcast or a piece of reading for them that'll help them dig deep and explore that. I can suggest that a group of them at the next team meeting explore that with a piece of reading and come back and have a chat about it. So there's things that I think you can do quite quickly that say, this sounds really important. Here's some things you can do to kind of deepen your understanding of it or explore it with folks without it, redirecting the session entirely. Does that feel helpful? I'm hoping that I've answered that a little bit.
That feels very helpful. I have a question to ask you from like facilitator to facilitator, because it's something I found myself struggling with in the recent group that I'm facilitating. I am seeing them a total of 7 times. So,
Okay,
if there's like unfinished business in one session, I can pick it up in the next one. But I have this bad habit of, well, I don't know if it's a bad habit, but oftentimes the sessions that I plan for are too long. Or, the participants will have to do some work in small groups and they have maybe like 5 questions to answer. And then I start by facilitating a discussion where they're sharing out their 5 answers. And so then the other group doesn't have time to share out their 5 answers, or they each get to 3 of the answers, for example. And I want to find a way to wrap up nicely the fact that sometimes we don't have time to get to even everything that I had planned or that we had said we would share. And so sometimes I've made the mistake of saying like, oh, we'll pick this up next time. And then I'm going away and doing my planning for the next session. And I'm like, we don't have time to pick it up, actually. And it would have been a better facilitation call to wrap it up in that session, even if we didn't have time to get to all of it. Have you found an elegant way to do that?
I don't know. It's elegant. I'm trying to think about how I think that I was saying to you earlier that I think quite a lot of my facilitation style is informed by my early years working with young people in youth services. And a lot of that was facilitating group sessions. And we often did have a fair amount of time because it was in an informal, like youth club type setting, but there was structure around it. And it would sometimes also be a fairly chaotic space. And so you had people coming in and out of the space. So it was quite a kind of well, chaotic, I think is the right, but it's quite dynamic, the space.
Yeah.
But what it meant was lots of reflection and lots of summary, because you're wanting to bring new people up to speed and you want to try in a safe way to close something off that has come up for an individual or the group before somebody in that group leaves. And that, so I think maybe I learned early on to do lots of those mini summaries because I want folks to feel heard. I want to be in some way through my facilitation style offering regular reassurance that I am tapped in. Yeah. So I heard you. And that occasionally I might say something and remember that someone said something connected, even if we couldn't explore it, and say, it was a bit like what Maureen said earlier, wasn't it? And try to connect it to the thing then that I am saying. And the thing I think that has always helped me is to have a little bit of humour and transparency. So before opening it up, I might say, look, folks, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, we're not going to be able to get to everybody. I'm going to do my best. So if you think that we've gone on for too long, you can just give me a reminder if you want. Like, hey, let's help each other keep to time. Remember, we're a community of learning today. So we want to make sure that we're supporting one another. And then I'll go into it. Also, that is an opportunity for me to come back to the community principles that we've set in the beginning as well, which is about respect and taking the time and support and mutual aid and things like that. So when I am wrapping things up before that person feels like maybe they've said everything that them and the group were talking about, we're coming back to the idea that actually it's going to be really important to go to the next group, because that's going to allow for us all to build a better and deeper understanding of whatever this topic of conversation is. And it's really important to hear multiple perspectives, because you immediately become more collaborative when you do that. So I think the continuity of the principles of the session and wherever possible, implicitly and explicitly coming back to those community principles that we've all agreed to in the beginning helps me. And so implicitly, sometimes that might be just the way that I frame a statement. And of course it doesn't always work, but that feels comforting to me, because I feel like that's it's a way that I hold myself accountable. Like, I also agree to these community principles, and as a facilitator, I'm going to do my best to model what we've said as well.
Yeah, no, that feels very helpful. And I really like the word transparency that you used over and over again, like just showing the participants like, hey, look, I'm making these calls in real time also because I'm seeing how you all are responding. And I think as facilitators, there's so many different things we're holding. Like, we're looking at the clock, and then we have this like zoom out vision of like everything that we had planned to get to with the participants. And so them seeing, okay, we're a human responding to them as humans can be really helpful. One thing that I've really tried to stop doing is saying like, oh, we're out of time. So like, I'm looking at the clock, so I'm actually going to move us along. So it's like, I want to let them into my thought process, but also do that in a way that doesn't make the session feel rushed. And yeah, I think this variable of time is a tricky one. I mean, it's also what makes facilitation so interesting, but you don't know if an activity is going to generate a ton of conversation. It's very relevant with a group. Sometimes it's just one participant that takes up 90% of the time. And then sometimes it's like, you actually have to do a lot more harvesting in order to get the group to say anything. So yeah, it's just a lot to juggle.
Yeah, it is. I think it's really hard. I think that one of the things around the transparency piece, one of the things that I was taught or observed, particularly because I was working with people that were in really kind of vulnerable spaces in their lives, really some of the most marginalized people in our communities. And one of the things that I was needing to bear in mind in my practice was being trauma informed and trauma responsive. And part of that is building in as much empowerment and choice and voice into the space, and predictability. So kind of, if I'm saying, I'm just doing a time check, folks, or we're going to, in the next 15 minutes, just to let you know, we're going to be going for a break. I'm constantly throughout the session kind of reorientating people and situating people in the agenda as well. And so whilst I'm not like, we're out of time, I am saying, so, I told you that the agenda was ambitious, and we're about 3/4 through that now. So we want to make sure we try and cover as much of the content as we can, so that you've had a really good day and you feel that it's been a good use of your work time. So I suppose the reframing of that as well, so that they themselves, it's their learning space. It's about autonomy in terms of how they are engaging and how they are using it. And I'm trying to guide that by letting them know where they are all of the time as well.
I love that. I love that, because I think as the participants, if you have a facilitator that feels rushed and stressed for time, you yourself feel insecure, right? Because like they're not holding that container. Whereas like, I think the reframe you just offered allows space for the session to go in a couple, in ways that weren't foreseen and things to take a long time, but you're very calmly just observing like, oh, and let me just remind you, like, this is the framework, this is the time that we have today, and I'm going to make sure for the safety of all of us that that's honored. I'm going to let you know where you are at all times. And since, we spent a lot of time in this area, then we're actually only going to have a little bit of time before we wrap things up. And I think just like having that, I'm always working on just like being really grounded and not getting flustered. Like, even when learning moments come up and something maybe kind of shocking has just come in the space, just reacting to it like almost in an unfazed way, but not in a way that suggests you're not honoring, what has just happened, but almost just letting people sense that like you expect that to be part of the session. Like that is your role as the guide. That is your role as the container. It's not to control what's going on in the space. It's just to really clearly establish the boundaries and
I think so.
Help all the participants get through the session as safely and as comfortably as possible.
I think so.